What is up, everyone? Welcome back for a brand new episode of the Aftershow. I'm your host for the day, Perry Nemiroff, and this time around, we're covering an especially big movie, a movie that we had to wait 13 years for. We are breaking down Avatar: The Way of Water. We're digging into the visuals, the story, and the franchise's potential moving forward as well. Before we even start our conversation, though, I need to warn everyone that we are going to be talking Avatar: The Way of Water spoilers in this video. So if you haven't seen it yet, it's all good. Go out and see the movie and then come back and check out this conversation. The warning is out there. It's official. It's over and done with. Your final spoiler warning happens now.
If you want to live here, you have to ride.
Let's do it.
Just breathe. Breathe.
And now that that's taken care of, I get to welcome a guest that I'm very excited to introduce right now. And I'm nervous to introduce because I guarantee you he will put me through at least one existential crisis during this conversation. Hello and welcome, Coy Jandreau. Coy.
Am I a spoiler? Am I an Avatar: The Way of Water? This is your last warning. This man will existentially crises you about The Way of Water. And I got some. I'm ready. This is James Cameron Gets Me. This is going to be fun.
I'm conditioned at this point to expect that. I have fortified my brain. I'm ready. It'll be okay.
Sporky for life.
Let's get into it by checking out what's doing on the tomato meter right now. Looks like Avatar: The Way of Water is certified fresh at 78%, and the movie has a whopping 93% audience score, which is something else. The critics' consensus on this one states, narratively, it might be fairly standard stuff, but visually speaking, Avatar: The Way of Water is a stunningly immersive experience. So, Coy, I've been hearing the word masterpiece thrown around quite a bit with this movie. And personally, I can be very sensitive about using that word and do only use it for a select few films out there. But how do you feel about applying that particular word to Way of Water? Is that what you give it?
So the word masterpiece I reserve for very few films, but James Cameron does have a few of them. I consider T2 a masterpiece. I consider Aliens, a masterpiece. But I can't quite allow that word to be something you use for things that are as visually spectacular with as lean a story. I think that the storytelling in a movie is as important as the visual, but it's tricky because there are movies that get away with really, really incredible dialogue that can be shot poorly. And I think this is the first time I've ever seen the equivalent of the inverse of an incredible script shot poorly. I've gotten through movies that were shot very, very, very badly, or the sound was bad, but it was so rich that I was invested. This might be the first time that something is almost a masterpiece just from a visual standpoint. Like the AV of it all is very interesting when you go the other way. This movie is very lean on plot to me. It's something I have seen before, but it's something I've never seen before while being something I've seen before.
Yeah, we'll get into some of the story points shortly, but...
So I can't call it a masterpiece personally.
I'm so torn on the matter because, like I already said, I'm sensitive about using the word. I don't want to just throw it out and kind of reduce the meaning of it when I apply it to a film, but I've never seen anything like Avatar: The Way of Water visually. And as someone who was kind of lukewarm on the first Avatar movie, I was wowed by a lot of the features that everybody else out there was pretty impressed by back in the day. I wasn't someone who went back to the theater to see it over and over. I couldn't get over how floored I was by what this movie looked like and what they were able to accomplish visually. Again, I'm not getting into my thoughts on the story just yet, but when you think about what it feels like to be basically transported to the moon of Pandora and truly feel as though you're being fully enveloped by this fictional existence and have it work as well as it does, man, I kind of want to use kind of want to use the masterpiece word.
I've only, like, that word, I feel like has to be something that sticks with me in multiple ways. I don't feel like there was anything narratively that, like, a metaphor or a life revelation or a character that's going to stick with me. And I do feel like there are dozens of visuals that will. And that's why I bring up the dialogue-based films that don't have strong visuals, because often there are times that, like, a single line of dialogue can strike me and it'll stick with me, and quotes like resonate, and I don't have the visual in my head. I just feel that emotion. This is the inverse, where I don't feel like there'll be ever a moment of, like, impact that is a resonating here. It's going to be resonating here. So I don't know if that is fair to not describe it as a masterpiece, because this is a one-of-one experience. The first time I've gone, wow, I've never experienced something so visually, so ocularly, that didn't hit my heart in quite the same way. And that's not to say this is a bad film. That's not to say this is a good film. This is a great film. But is it a masterpiece? A masterpiece implies, to me, a 10 out of 10, a 5 out of 5, 100%, or something in the top 90 percentile. And to me, I can't allow something that didn't make me look at life differently a masterpiece. It needs to move, and maybe that's too high, but it needs to make my life different to be a masterpiece.
I feel like there's no better place to go at this point than to dig deep into the visuals that we do see here. Just like this revolutionary technology here that I still can't quite wrap my brain around. So again, it took us 13 years to get to an Avatar sequel. That is a whole lot of time to take to make the next film in a franchise like this. So Coy, do you think that time paid off? Do you see 13 years worth of advancements in Avatar: The Way of Water ultimately?
I do, ultimately. And it's really interesting that, the first film changed special effects in a way that only James Cameron can. He said he was going to change everything. He changed everything. So 13 years later, how do you see something for the first time again? You can never have a first impression twice. So it's really hard to have a sequel that's so visual based, that's so based in wow. And yet he did. I definitely was wowed again. I definitely got that, oh my God, I'm on Pandora again. I definitely got they can do this again, but to a different scale. Because I think what he did was he was revolutionary in Avatar, and he was evolutionary in The Way of Water. But in the way that he evolved his own technology was almost more impressive. The moments that you felt the interactivity between someone that was actually there, like Spider, and someone that wasn't real because they were a giant blue Na'vi was seamless. And I do find in the first film, just because of where it was 13 years ago, there are moments I was very aware of the actors versus the Na'vi. There are maybe 7 minutes out of this 3-hour runtime that I was aware that I wasn't watching something that was real. I was so immersed throughout that I fully felt like I was watching something that did exist. And that's a one-of-one experience. Like there is no special effects movie to date, short of Way of Water, that is this evolutionary to the entire genre of blockbuster.
I've seen a bunch of live action animation hybrid movies where, I enjoy them and I think they work well enough. I don't think I've ever seen a movie quite like this that makes me completely forget that performance capture to CG character, like that character is not a real living, breathing human being that, at least in my mind while I'm watching The Way of Water, like exists on a faraway moon. The Na'vi feels so incredibly real. And again, I think that the Na'vi work really well in the 2009 film. This was a different kind of like believability, tactile, reach out and touch it. They're a living, breathing being that actually exists there. And one of the most impressive things to me is kind of what you were just talking about a little. The idea that you could have a Na'vi character next to a human being and not for a second does your mind ever think that's not real. That's movie that's the thing is I love talking about movie magic. Movie magic is a special thing. This movie is so magical. It made me forget that it was movie magic happening. Specifics now, Coy.
Yes.
Do you have any particular wow-worthy moments in Avatar: The Way of Water as far as the visuals go that you think are really going to stick with you?
You know, there's a bunch that jump out that I think a lot of people have talked about, but I want to talk about one that I don't know gets enough credit. When you go underwater and you experience that first like plunge, and everyone in the reviews has talked about like, once we were underwater, I was so enthralled with this new world. For me, it was a second after that when they're actually exploring the village. What I loved was the intricacy of the actual physical world they built above the water. I was so impressed with the tribe's village feeling useful. Like everything felt like I could see how everything operated. Like sometimes they show a fictional world. Wakanda Forever didn't feel like it lived in. Like to me, when they went underwater, I was like, that's dark, and like it just didn't feel like the people. Like the Talokans felt like vibrant and alive and bright, and like they'd be proud of art and things in their culture. And they had the sun, but everything else was dark and kind of like, yeah, we're underwater. And I get realism versus artistic interpretation, but what I loved was they were able to make it realistic with artistic interpretation by putting it just above the water, and things felt like this blend of wicker and island, and things felt like they were of an island you could visit but you actually can't, and things felt practical but alien. It felt like the tangible version of the Na'vi themselves, and none of it was real. So I was so impressed at the fact that I was like, I could go there and hang out for a night in these awesome cabanas.
I think it's kind of similar. I think I was most wowed by things that were happening like in the in-between in terms of on land versus something connected to water. Like in particular, every single time a Na'vi character was like getting rained on or maybe emerging from the water, it felt, or like even just stepping in the shore as the water goes up on the sand, like all of that felt so real and I'll use this word again, tactile. Like I could feel the water drizzling off of their faces, and also just like the level of detail and just the way the water glistens off of them is so incredibly realistic that it blew my mind. But my real answer to this particular question that I posed to you was totally watching a dude's arm get sliced off and like fly into the ocean.
It's the most Perry answer possible. This one horror moment.
I saw it coming. Like I was because it like that takes a while to play out to fruition, and I'm like, no way, he did it. He cut that guy's arm off.
Also, I think the most emotionally resonant moment of the movie to me, the moment that resonated the most was the whaling being so horrific, in that those whales aren't of our world, and they're only loosely tied to our world in that they look like whales. Like I don't have a lot. I like whales; they're great. I don't have a lot of connection to whales. I'm not gonna lie. Like I know how bad whaling is. I can't watch those videos. I don't watch those videos. I don't need that in my head. So maybe that's why this was so jarring. Is it was forced upon me, and I had to acknowledge how awful people can be. And again, that is the story elements I connected to. He is telling a story about us through these creatures. He is telling a story about our planet through Pandora. And I did connect to the whale in a way I wouldn't have expected. This creature was able to make me feel for it in a few lines of dialogue with a few incredible eye shots and this connectivity where we never heard its voice. But my problem was it kind of undermined a lot of the first movie for me, in that there's so much in the first movie about connecting and bonding and finding your way in nature. And these Na'vi just show up in this water planet. They're like, what up? We got telekinesis. I can talk to whales. Like, I didn't buy the pop-up yellow papyrus font where he's suddenly like, hello, I can speak to you. Like, I didn't feel that at all. So the fact that I was able to visually connect to the whale dying and feeling for it so badly, when I was like, bruh, why is this whale telekinetic? It was a very weird dichotomy.
It took time for them to understand each other.
It was 7 minutes. They were like, what up, bro? And he's like, processing. What up, bro?
We'll get into it with story, because Loak's journey was hands down my favorite part of this movie. But before we touch story beats right now, one more visual question for you. What do you see in Avatar: The Way of Water that you think will actually like actively get to see change the way that movies are made in the near future?
I think it's the new bar, and that's so broad, but I don't think we accept, and obviously budget's going to change. This movie is, cartoonishly expensive for now, but like everything gets cheaper as it's developed. Like, like it's like the Olympics. Once someone breaks that record, it's like everybody's breaking the record. Like once you see that it can be done, it's been done, and thus it's possible. So I think that now we know what's possible. We've changed the standard of realism. I think we're going to see different textures. I think the big thing that isn't talked about in this world enough is that the background, midground, and foreground all felt just as real. A lot of times when you look at special effects movies, they're like, we really focused on the Na'vi, but the planet was a mess. Or the middle between like the established world they played in and the characters, there's that weird like, well, I know they're going to pick that up. It's got a black line around it like a 70s animated film. Like there's a lot of times tells. This movie didn't have tells. So I think the biggest evolution that we're going to look at is this is the beginning of seamlessness. There is a seamlessness now that is going to change cinema.
I wonder if this particular piece of technology actually played a part in what you were just describing. But I had asked the producer, John Landau, about, what new thing did you guys come up with for The Way of Water that you're most looking forward to seeing other films out there put to use, not just your future Avatar movies. And he brought up the idea of using simulcam and explained how on the initial film, they did have that technology. And that technology is basically so a director can like compose a frame while being able to see their CG character, even if the CG character isn't in reality in front of their eyes on set. The thing was back then, that CG character was only visible in front of everything. A character, and the example he used was a character, for example, couldn't like walk behind a desk and you be able to visualize that in what you are looking at. But now they have that technology where a CG character can walk behind something. And that just feels to me like it gives a director so much more range when it comes to what you were just describing, being able to compose the layers of a shot and not necessarily what is front and center in a frame.
Also, think about our gray matter, right? Like we've gotten more accepting of this reality. Think about like any director working right now has seen more CGI in the last 10 years than they saw in the rest of their lifetime. Anyone that watches movies is aware of the Z-axis in a different way. Every great director is aware of the Z-axis in a depth of field sense, but now we're filming in a different era. Look at the volume. Look at what we're able to do in real time. So not only do you have simulcam, which is incredible. I didn't know they could have layers in real time. But when you're like, I did a presentation for Sony where they talked about they're basically having real-time backgrounds that the director can be directing simultaneously with their actors that are moving in real time. So you don't have that silly car thing anymore. Like it's a real-time multiple directing. But that's directing two things simultaneously. This, what you're describing, is directing an infinite number of things simultaneously and thinking just in the mindset. It's like I always talk about with the internet. We are having to learn in real time how to process a certain volume of data at all times. Our next generation, people that are 15 now, can understand a rapid amount of data in a different way than we have because that information capacity isn't new to them. That's not something they had to develop. Directors that are coming up now are going to see Avatar and go like, well, that's what movies can be. And they're going to know how to look at a shot because of this technology and frame it in a different way. Like James Cameron is birthing an entire new generation of filmmakers. And that's what makes this unique. This allows for, this is an exponential increase in technology. It's not linear, it's exponential, it's staggering.
Without a doubt. I feel like it's probably also necessary to point out that he did have an extreme amount of money and an extreme amount of time that maybe wouldn't be afforded to all filmmakers out there.
Are you saying student filmmakers don't have simul?
I'm just glad that ultimately it does feel to me like he used all of those resources and that time to improve the visuals to such an extent and really have the possibility of changing the game for filmmaking going forward. Coy, the time has come. Let's get into some story details here. A criticism of the first film was obviously that it had an unoriginal and weak story. Did you feel that way? And if so, is this movie something that improves on that, or is it kind of the same thing all over again?
It's really interesting because the first film to me, and I know this is trite, but some things are cliche for a reason. I definitely felt the Dances with Wolves meets Ferngully thing. So I get that that's contrived because that is like the story beats are very similar in so many ways. But what's interesting to me about the second one is it didn't feel like one or two movies. It felt like a genre of movies. This to me felt like a sequel. So like I didn't feel like I was going through like color by numbers, but I did feel like I was walking a familiar path. Mm-hmm. So like I definitely knew what I was getting for. I definitely knew how I thought the third act would go, and it did. And I definitely felt like I expected certain, this is spoiler, so this is your real last warning. I definitely, when they introduced more than two children, was like, one of them's gonna die. like I definitely was aware of death from the opening. As
You
soon as
thought that. I was shocked. I was shocked that they went as far to kill one of the Sully children.
As soon as they introduced so many of them that I couldn't keep track of them, I was like, one's dead. And then as soon as I got used to which, like, so then the story elements played through very traditionally, right? Like the one that's more traditionally successful versus the underdog. The underdog's going to make it. The traditionally successful one's going to die. Probably the older child. So the middle child has to become the older child. It's a walkabout. It's a furthering of manhood, especially a male child taking over the dominant male, especially an underdog male child, then having to identify with the adult male child while he dies and becoming the father figure to the younger. It's all very like, I've seen that.
I think ultimately Loak is on his own path, and that's part of the point. But before I get specifically to that, more broadly, I can very much recognize the flaws in the original film, but I do have to say that in revisiting it now, because I was a very different movie consumer back in 2009 compared to who I have become today, I did appreciate the pairing of what felt like a more traditional classic story paired with this just like incredible reveal of what Pandora is and how this avatar technology worked. There's something about that type of storytelling paired with those ideas that I think does work fairly well together. But I'll agree with you in terms of the evolution of the story and this feeling like a sequel. And well, I was able to identify some more traditional character arcs where maybe not in terms of the death, but other things I could kind of predict where they were going a little bit. I do think that between the performances and the time and really like the 3 hours that they take to sit with these characters and flesh them out and understand the family dynamic, I think a lot of it worked well enough. And some character arcs are stronger than others, though.
I agree with you. And that's what's interesting is I can't put my finger on my disconnect. Like, I don't need things to always break the mold every time there's a story. I don't need, like, I like traditional stories. I enjoy the Marvel movies. Not a lot of them are doing something that's going to be revolutionary storytelling wise. They do have evolutionary elements, but like, I know how they're going to go generally. And that doesn't bother me. What's interesting to me is I definitely felt like I was about 20 minutes ahead at all times, and my brain was wandering as opposed to living in it. I kept going like, oh, I bet this is going to happen to Jake. And then it did. And so I was like, cool. And it didn't hit because I was going like, hey, that thing, I was right.
It's a thing that it's hard to put into words, but even though I could feel where things are going, I didn't have that. And I think that speaks to the visuals again and just how immersive every single frame is. There's always so much to look at. And I could always feel the complexity of the internal struggle of the key character that a particular moment was focusing on. And I'll walk into the Loak storyline with that point. That was above and beyond to me the most powerful character transformation in the entire film. He went basically from stubborn outcast who was in a more childish sense marching to the beat of his own drum in defiance of his parents and what they wanted, to understanding that outcast quality isn't something to be shunned or have to shed in order to appease his parents, but celebrated and accepted and embraced in order to make things better for the Na'vi and his particular clan and his family going forward. I thought that his stuff was so incredibly beautiful. And I think that goes back to the big brother and just like the idea of him being able to look up to and respect him, but ultimately not feel the pressure to conform to the example that he set. And like, what a brilliant message to send to, like I was about to say, to send to kids. Like, forget kids. Every living, breathing human being on this planet that tries to live up to certain standards that they think are musts, and then they ignore the special qualities that make them unique to begin with. So that particular story arc was my absolute favorite across the board.
I agree. Loak was the highlight as far as characterization. And I honestly, like, again, with the expectation of the brother dying in order for him to have his story, it felt like more a piece of his story that his brother died. And I think that bothered me a little bit because I was like, oh, of course, he can't become his own man until his brother dies. There he goes. And I was kind of just waiting for that the whole movie so he could become his own man. And then I was like, oh, and then he's got to make sure he parents his father. That way it completes the journey. And then when that happened, I was like, now the next movie, I'm very excited to find out what's original with him.
But the transformation starts before the brother passes.
Oh, yeah, but it wasn't complete. Like, that was the bow, right? Like, so I kept waiting for... I kept wanting that transformation to happen, knowing it was the cost was the brother. Like he was what it would cost him to self-actualize. But now that he has, I'm invested in him enough that I'm excited for Avatar 3 because he did all the things I knew he had to do. I was like, okay, now he's a butterfly. Dope. We got out of the cocoon. I'm excited to see my boy, my butterfly.
It's fair. In that particular case, I don't necessarily feel it as though the brother was like used as a narrative device, though. I still think they earned it, and they earned that spark of a transformation that he gives Loak. In terms of other characters, though, that felt like they were largely there in service of other characters' journeys, the one that I felt it with most, I guess in a negative sense, was Neytiri and Jake. A lot of the times it felt like Neytiri was going along with Jake's journey, or not necessarily going along with, but there are particular moments where he's making big decisions for the clan and then ultimately for his family that I would have loved a private moment with her to see and feel how she processed something. And it just so happens that Zoe Saldana is an absolute master of being able to give someone maximum emotion in a scene at the drop of a hat and make you believe it. So I still think Neytiri plays quite well in this movie, but there were certain points along the way where I'm like, can I just get into her headspace a little more? And I also know that that's the point of their relationship that they're at. I mean, it's not necessarily a new thing. They've had kids and time has passed, but this is a totally new situation that they're in. And, you know, she needs to go along with him. But I guess that brings me back to my main point is that, like, even when he decides that it's best for the Sully family to leave the forest and leave the Omaticaya clan, the place and the clan that she has known all her life, I think they sell the moment well enough, but it also really would have meant a lot if we had just a couple minutes with Neytiri where she really expressed how she felt about that, and maybe some apprehension, and then maybe coming to the conclusion that yes, indeed, Jake is right, and this is the best path.
I agree, and that's kind of what I was speaking to with like moments of disrespect to the first film. Is it definitely felt like they were able to blend into this world immediately. They were definitely able to like sacrifice the place that they fought for the entire first film in like 5 minutes. And I get you've got to move the story along, but it all felt like it was at her cost. Like I definitely felt like Jake has just been a problem for Neytiri. Like her entire existence, like I'm gonna come in and mess your home up, then I'm gonna make you leave. We got these kids, one's gonna die. Like I just feel bad for her that Jake's this, and maybe that's another thing. Maybe I have some like guilt about like I identify with this character. Boy, does he mess up people's lives. So like there's a disconnect there because you're identifying with your lead from the first film, and he only messes up the people's lives he cares about. And I get that that's life, and I get that being a parent is hard, and I get that he was super cruel to his middle child, but he also was disrespectful to his queen, like his woman, the person that like got him to understand the ways of nature. I didn't feel like he listened to her, and I didn't love that. I definitely struggled a bit with it is a movie, not part of a TV series. It's a franchise, not a TV show. And I think that this very quickly fell into the Marvel problem. And I do consider it a problem where it is okay to have an unresolved story if you know you're getting a third one, like The Matrix did or whatnot, but have a ... An ellipses is different than a dash. And I think a dash is okay because it implies a conjunction. This felt like an ellipses where I was like, ooh, I don't really know where Spider came from. There wasn't a baby in that first movie. Who was that kid running around? And then we've got this immaculate conception girl. I'm like, where are these children coming from without real explanations? Like Spider didn't make sense. His storyline didn't work for me. The entire time they were like, the whole time they were with the enemies, he was like, let me help you guys out. I'm sure this will go very well. He has no reason to like or trust these people. And he's helping them.
he has no reason to like or trust these people, but like, let's not forget he's a kid. He's a kid that didn't grow up with like traditional parental figures. And also Jake and Neytiri never fully accepted him as one of their own. And then all of a sudden he is presented with a version of his father who is essentially giving him the experience of being taken under one's wing, even though I think Spider almost always sticks to like core beliefs, and he does put a stop to certain things when he can. Like, he's in a stressful life or death situation, and he's also probably experiencing these much wanted emotions that he's never been exposed to before. So I don't know, all that confusion there, it really worked for me. And I also think I have to give a lot of credit to Jack Champion. That is not an easy role to play. My God.
I didn't buy his disbelief when they were hurting those island folk. I didn't once go like, yeah, bro, you knew this was coming. Maybe you were strong-armed into it. Maybe you were emotionally manipulated. But obviously these giant military guys trying to kill your family are going to hurt other people. Like, it was so like, well, yeah, maybe the guy with the gun that's been punching things is bad. Spoiler alert, he's a bad guy. Like, it just felt like, he's a bad guy. He's going to do bad things.
Guy? Like, well, he's a bad guy. He's a bad guy. I walk that back. He is a bad guy. Here's the big question with Quaritch. So, OG, original Quaritch, bad guy, did terrible things. He's dead, so this doesn't matter, but he is not redeemable. What percentage of OG Quaritch is Recom Quaritch, and does Recom Quaritch still have the ability, and should we even be open-minded to him being able to evolve, maybe via OG Quaritch's son?
I feel like that's going to be an interesting commentary on reform, the prison system, if people can grow, if people can evolve, if that's going to be a commentary on nature versus nurture. I'm excited for that story, but I would have rather had it in a way that didn't sacrifice Spider saving him and thus negating everything Jake did. If they regrew another Quaritch and was just like, hey, there's a guy, and maybe there's a commentary on Plato's The Cave, in that every time you get further out of the cave, the shadows dwindle and the art becomes less of a representation of the original self. Maybe, too, the clone becomes less of an interpretation of the original self, much like again, Plato's The Cave can be told in a myriad of ways, and cloning would be a fascinating way to do that. But instead, they were like, hey, everything this movie tried to do, everything that Jake was trying to protect, this dude's going to negate it every time he can. Every time that you should take a right, Spider took a left, and I was like, bruh, I don't like you anymore. You're out. I'm done. Like, he kept making every wrong decision. You can make a few. You can write it off as being a kid. You can write it off as being emotionally manipulated. But he was just a problem.
He caused problems. I can't deny that. I do think that ultimately the big problematic decision towards the end is going to wind up feeding into the franchise in a positive manner.
Oh, I'm more excited for 3 than I was for 2 because of 2. Like, this might be a reverse Empire Strikes Back. Like, I might be, the third one might be the best of them because it's able to tell the story that's now, they've earned this original story from telling these tropes they had to get through, maybe.
I think the fourth one might be the really incredible one, because James Cameron told me it was something to the effect of, I think I have some of the quote here. He said that when he turned in the script for Avatar 2, the studio gave him 3 pages of notes. When he turned in the script for 3, he got a page of notes. So like, things were improving, so to speak. When he turned in the script for Avatar 4, the only thing that the creative executive wrote back to him was, holy F word. As he explained, it goes nuts in a good way. How did you feel about the runtime? Did this movie justify it? And do you think you'd be open-minded to getting an Avatar 3, 4 beyond with a 3-hour plus running time now?
I think that's the standard now. I think it needs to be 3 hours. Not the standard in the movie sense, in the Pandora sense. Like, I think now that you immerse yourself, right? This isn't a movie. This is a theme park ride. It's and that's a compliment. This is an experience. You're going on a journey. You're having a time where you've got a ton of characters come in, but you also need the time to lean back and experience. This isn't a movie that you lean forward in through all 3 acts. It's a movie that you lean forward, lean back, lean forward, experience. Then you stay in the 3rd act, gripped and riveted, but you have that experience in the chair. I don't think 2 hours works for that. I think you need to have times where you're in the atmosphere of Pandora. I imagine we're going to be visiting more worlds in the next one. I also want that kind of I want to watch the world unfold while I'm in it. And if we rush, it won't work. And I also feel like this movie had stuff that I wanted more of. For example, Neytiri feeling betrayed. For example, Spider being emotionally manipulated, so I felt like some of his decisions were justified. For example, Jake just not being a I understood where he was coming from, but it would have been nice to see a little bit more of his bond with his sons before one died. Like I definitely felt the bond, but I didn't feel it enough that I could justify him being an overprotective father. I felt it when Neytiri was saying, they're not soldiers, they're your sons. I then would have liked to have seen a moment where he felt that towards them. So like shortening it would only, I think, rob me of emotional connection.
I think your point with Neytiri and Jake right there is spot on. One of the reasons why I appreciated the 3-hour running time the most is because I thought it made me very well immersed in their family dynamic to justify a lot of those decisions that had the movie been any shorter, I don't think they would have gotten to certain emotional payoffs or even made me willing to believe in some of those, like, is that a good decision or is that a bad decision type of thing? I think that you needed all that meat behind it and that lived-in experience behind it in order to make some of those beats work. Just like in general, though, like I'll fully admit I'm a human being. I was in a little bit of a panic stepping into a 3-hour plus movie worrying about like needing to get up and go to I didn't drink anything the first time because I really didn't want to miss anything. I saw it twice.
It's such a water-based movie. That movie's water. You're like, I'm so parched.
It feels like some sort of attack.
When there was running water, when they first got to Pandora, and that was when I first had to pee, and I was like, okay, this is probably an exploratory scene where they're going to show like everything. But then it became one of my favorite scenes because I love the world. So then I was just like, the water is pouring, but I'm so enthralled. It was torture.
I didn't feel the running time once either time I saw it.
I felt the running time
flew by.
I felt it in the third act, and I think that was more akin to me being like, oh, now all the things I thought are happening. And it wasn't the runtime as much as me going like, okay, here we are, and I've been sitting. And it was more a physical thing than a mental thing. I at no point was like, I'm bored. I was just aware that I was like, and now the colors are colored in, and we're ready to roll. So like, yes and no. I definitely, like, I wouldn't want it any shorter, but I was also aware that it was 3 hours. But I was okay with that. I like being on Pandora. Like, if you throw those glasses on me, I don't want to take them off. I want to be in.
So the big question here now, at this point, with future films on the way / being planned, is it actually possible for this movie to make $2 billion at the box office? James Cameron himself has actually said, I believe this came from a GQ piece, that he informed the studio that this film represented the worst business case in movie history, and that ultimately, in order for it to be profitable, you had to be something like the third or fourth highest grossing film in history. That's the threshold. Like,
can we
you just set an near impossible bar for yourself.
I gotta give credit to the man. We've talked about him a few times in this, and I've praised him, but the balls on James. Now, there's no balls on the Na'vi. You can see their little loincloths floating around, but there's no seeming genitalia. The balls on James Cameron make up for it. The sheer volume of that man swinging balls. He's like, I'm gonna make a movie 13 years later, and it's gonna need to be the #3 movie of all time, and then it opened to $500 million worldwide. He did it. Like, it will be fine. This movie's going to have legs. This movie is going to do great over Christmas. This movie is going to be re-released 87 times. This movie is going to be something that you want to watch the first and second of. This movie is not something that's going to translate to home video. You're going to want to release this on the 5-year anniversary, the 10-year anniversary. It's going to make money. It's going to be fine.
It's going to make money. I think doing great at the box office is a different thing than doing what this movie needs to do to turn a profit. I think $2 billion compared to $1.5 billion, two completely different things. I do think that this movie is going to be quite successful. It debuted at $134 million in North America and $435 million globally. So it's already made a lot, but those numbers are slightly below expectations. I do think that we're going to get a lot of repeat viewings. It is very clear that, like, the road is clear for this movie to have legs. There are no big blockbuster type movies standing in its way and stopping it from having to rely on a strong opening weekend and not much more. I do think it's going to get repeat viewings, but again, becoming one of the top 5 grossing movies of all time. And especially when the box office isn't fully back. The box office is back a good percentage, a good deal. But it's not at the levels where it was. And that's why I think 1.5 billion is a very high number, a very impressive number. That's the more realistic number that we should be talking about versus 2 billion.
I think it's going to also be a conversation of looking at Avatar 4. We've heard how much of the next one is built into this one. We've heard the budget of this one involves the impact of the other ones. I think that, yes, that is a great soundbite, and I hadn't heard it, and I just laughed at it. But James Cameron's like, horrible decision. At the same time, that's its own marketing. If you say something as bold as this needs to be the number 3 thing of all time, how many other filmmakers can be like, hey, the studio backed a movie that has to be the number 3 film of all time? And really, it has to be something that folds into number 3 and 4 to overall bring in the 6 billion or whatever it needs. But as far as marketing goes, genius. And I do think, honestly, I don't think it's going to clear 2 billion. I don't think it's going to be the number 3 of all time. But I do think that's what everyone's seeing for Christmas. I do think that no one's going to be like, am I seeing Babylon or Avatar? You know what your decision is. You're not gonna randomly choose between the 2 big Christmas movies. If you're going to the movies, you're probably choosing Avatar or one of the others, but like as a family, you're going to Avatar. So I do think it's going to actually be a smaller drop off than most people are expecting as far as like week 1 to week 2. Bracket 2 usually is a staggering 40 to 60%. I think it's going to be like 30. I think it's going to do well, and I think the legs are going to get it through February.
You know what's likely going to give it even more legs, even longer legs? Not more legs. It would be longer legs. Otherwise, it would have many legs, and that might be weird. But it's a movie, whatever. Oscars, because I feel fairly certain about the fact that this movie is going to clean up when it comes to Oscar nominations. Coy, where do you stand on that? What is this getting nominated for? And will it go on to win anything?
Every special effect Oscar is deserved. The sound design is deserved. The score is deserved for a nomination. I don't know about win because it was a great year in scores. I don't necessarily see getting a Best Picture nomination because
I respect your opinion, but no.
I respect your opinion. I immediately disagree with it. I think we're living in an age where the Academy is looking at what they're putting their votes behind and know that they're very genre reluctant. They don't put their votes, and I think this is going to be an example of them putting their votes behind other genre releases and not this one, because they don't do if they do 10 nominations, 2 are genre films. I don't see this one being one of the only 2 with this year stacked. I think Everything Everywhere All at Once is going to take over this. I think Top Gun Maverick is going to take over this. We've got a blockbuster and a weird movie. Those are the 2 that might eat away at the Avatar chances.
I think that Everything Everywhere All at Once and Top Gun Maverick are basically guaranteed Best Picture nominations. I think they have the better chances of winning, but I do think, and I think there's really no doubt in my mind that Avatar: The Way of Water is going to get a Best Picture nomination. Also, because think of what you just said. It's going to get so many nominations and so much love in all the crafts categories. That all feeds into Best Picture. And also, what did it get? Like an A cinema score? The other good thing here is that it's a crowd-pleasing movie that I'm not saying everybody loves, but the majority seem to really enjoy it. And I think that could feed into the Best Picture conversation. When it comes to the Academy's resistance to include many blockbusters in that particular conversation, what I sadly think happened, not for Avatar, but for this other movie, is I think with Avatar's success, I have bumped Black Panther: Wakanda Forever out of my Best Picture conversations, but I'm still keeping it in other categories. But I do think that right now, Way of Water is very safe with a Best Picture nomination. I also think that James Cameron has a real shot of getting a Best Director nomination. The visual effects race, if not for Top Gun Maverick, I think, because I think that still has a chance of winning, I do think it should be over. I think it should be handed to Avatar: The Way of Water. There's just so many revolutionary things. Look out for cinematography. I'm leaning against maybe score here. I think there is too much competition. I think this year was tight for score, and it was good, but it wasn't exceptional. I love James Horner, and using some of his pieces were great. And I do think directing,
I don't necessarily see cinematography because of what a year it was. I mean, maybe a nom, but I don't see it at number one.
You have to consider how it's like such a completely different craft. In particular, like the categories that come to mind in that respect are cinematography and something like production design, where their traditional craft needs to be executed in such a unique way because of the effects involved in this movie. And I think those corners of the industry are going to respect that. They had to add like a whole new layer to their craft in order to achieve what we see in the finished product.
I think there's also a reason Andy Serkis hasn't won an Oscar, though. You know what I mean? If they looked at it that way.
I could go into the performance capture conversation for a long, long time.
But you know what I mean? If they're going to look at cinematography, then they'd also have looked at Andy Serkis. And I hope the Academy has evolved in 10 years. But the fact that Andy Serkis didn't get a number of wins at this point always has me going like, okay, let me look at when does this shift? And maybe this is when it shifts. But I always have a little asterisk when it comes to these big blockbusters in the Academy. Other awards, absolutely. But the actual Academy Awards always feels like they want things that are tragically biopic, and they want things that are, based around Hollywood, and they want things that are it's a little half for them, 2/3 for them and 1/3 for us, and I just don't know where this is going to land for that third.
Well, we're breaking the mold.
I hope this is the thing that
Parasite, Coda, they're shaking things up with Top Gun Maverick and everything everywhere all at once in particular being talked about in those conversations to such an extent is very exciting to me.
My movie of the year getting some love, Banshees of Inisherin, getting all that Irish flavor out there. My people getting respect. Yeah. People now know like the love of donkeys, and they learned what poaching was. Very excited to see poaching on the big screen.
Jenny, I love Jenny. What about when it comes to your personal rankings? About where does Avatar: The Way of Water fall for you?
This is going to sound very, very low, but it's been for me an incredible year. I've had an incredible time at the movies this year. I don't know if it's because of lockdown and getting back in the theater means so much to me. I don't know if it's because of like the shared human connection of going to events around people. I don't know what it is, but to me, 2022 has been a resounding year in cinema. This is like 17, 18 in my top 20.
That's fair. I mean, this really has been a very special. I'm currently in the very stressful process of paring down my top 10. I think I've hit 13, and like it's breaking my heart into a million pieces to cut
I'm
out
doing a top
3
20, 22.
So the fact that I'm saying Avatar: The Way of Water is in my top 20 is very high praise, because I very easily could also produce a top 20 of 2022 and feel like that strongly about all of those movies. So it is quite the accomplishment. It's very high up in my rankings. Let's take a moment to look ahead a little bit, Coy. So I believe where they stand with Avatar 3 and 4, John Landau, the producer, of course, has said Avatar 3 principal photography on that movie is 95% finished. When it comes to Avatar 4, they've filmed the first act of the movie. So that's where we stand right now. What are you hoping is in those movies based on what you see and want more of in Way of Water?
I assume we're going to visit more places. I know that they landed in the water world at the end, and they accepted him as one of their own. And they had that moment of like, I'm part of the tribe now. And I love that. But I don't think they stay there. I think James Cameron loves elements. I think we're going to get, what's the band? Earth, Wind, and Fire. I think we've had Earth. I think we've had water. I think we're going to get like some sort of fire Na'vi and then some sort of like windy Na'vi. I think we're going to go through the elements of the world of Pandora. I don't know what a wind Na'vi looks like.
A windy Na'vi.
Yeah, I don't know. Do they live like in the sky? Maybe the people that stay aerial. Like we saw
underground Na'vi too.
Yeah, we could see an Earth Na'vi that's different. I see us going elemental.
I'm literally trying to figure out the most like unusual place a Na'vi could exist now and determine that I want that.
Plasma Na'vi.
I think they have talked a little bit about the idea of exploring additional clans in the future films. And I think in one interview out there, I'm pretty sure it came up that there might be material that takes place on Earth in the future, which is very interesting to me. And I think brings up a lot of interesting possibilities there. When it comes to the specific characters, I'll go back to what I said before. I want more Neytiri. I want a deeper look at like her headspace and how she's feeling about, like, the time has passed to do that with the events of Avatar: The Way of Water as they unfold. But I want Avatar 3 to let me sit with her while she processes what she just went through.
I feel like that scene with Spider afraid of her is an indicator of what we're getting.
I love that moment.
Incredible moment.
That is one of my favorite moments of the entire movie.
Same. And that's a moment I liked both Neytiri and Spider's representation of the end of their arcs. And that took some of the rockier moments for me. So it absolutely had a payoff. And again, I'm more excited for 3 because of those moments. But I do think that was an indicator of where we're going with her. She didn't say like my Jake until after that. I think she was going through trauma of like feeling for him again and like coming. I feel like he's her anchor of like, I lost myself and you're my rock, you're my anchor, you're my Jake. And I want to see that from him again. I felt like he was disrespectful to the queen and that bothered me throughout. So I want to see their bond get stronger again. I want to see them maybe bond over the loss of a child. I think Jake was, and for the acting standpoint, I was never bothered by Sam Worthington. I just didn't have a lot of like, I was neutral. I was like, that guy did what he needed to do. I was so impressed with Sam Worthington in Way of Water. I think he gave an incredible performance. And I always think Zoe Saldana is one of the most talented, powerful, energetic people on the planet.
It goes back to the level of technology. You get so much more access to their performance this time. I'm sure their performances were just as good in the flesh the last time, but with this technology, you see like the tiniest detail in their facial expressions and every ounce of emotion that they're exhibiting. It's something else. Going back to seeing the evolution of their relationship, though, we had about this many bros and this many my Jakes. So
the amount of bros. There were more cousins than my Jakes. It was my Jakes, cousins, bros. If you watch this 3-hour journey with like a Four Loko and just drink for cousins and bros.
It has to be like a Guinness World Record, the amount of time bro is uttered in this movie.
Without Paul Walker, yes. I think that Jake was summoning his Paul Walker, and I love and respect and miss the great Paul Walker, but the bros and cuz quotient was damn near Orange County.
Here's another thing that I really want in the next movie. I want more time with Recom Quaritch, understanding what it means to be a recom. Like one of the things that fascinates me most about that character, and I guess the previous version of him as well, is like Quaritch essentially agreed to become the thing he hated most. And as Stephen Lang explained it to me, he was basically like following corporate orders. You know, he didn't think he was going to die. He was just doing the thing he was told because it wasn't going to happen anyway. But now that it's happened and Recom Quaritch still has the understanding of the Na'vi that original Quaritch had in the first film, that's got to be like a mind, like, you know what type of situation of coming to terms with like who he has become compared to who he was before and where he'll need to go in the future. So I'm very eager to, I guess, explore more of that particular technology and what percent of OG and Recom Quaritch ultimately is in this next movie.
Yeah, and I think Stephen Lang, like, you don't cast that man. He's not one note. There's a lot more to say, and I think his villain in the first one was incredible. Now we're seeing a little bit more nuance in this one. Not that the villain wasn't nuanced, but, like, he was a bad guy, and I kind of liked that. It was good to have a bad guy on screen that was a bad guy. Like, the T-1000's a bad guy. Like, there is a difference between nuanced villain and mustache twirling. There's a middle ground of just villainy, and I think that Slang did that well in the first one. I now want to see it go a little bit of the other way in the third one. I want to see a little bit more of like what his thought process is, why he feels so connected to this mission that isn't technically his, and whether he fights against, you know, the corporation, like the yes and soldier mentality.
I feel like we could talk for maybe 13 years about Avatar: The Way of Water, but we're not allowed to have that kind of time. So we have to wrap this up. Coy, as always, it is a pleasure talking movies with you. You have made my brain spin in new ways yet again, and I appreciate it. Before we let you go, can you tell everybody out there where they could find your wonderful work on the internet?
You can find me at Coyjandreau, CoyJandreau, on Twitter, on TikTok, on Instagram. I'm over at The Real Rejects. I'm over at New Rockstars a lot. I'm starting some new stuff in the new year. I've got a podcast called Coycast. I don't like sleep. I don't like rest, but I do love art, so I like sharing it with y'all.
Rest up and celebrate all of your hard work of 2022 in this last little bit of time here, please, my friend.
I got to earned it this year.
You've earned it. All right, that is it. I'm going to say a big thanks to everybody out there watching this. We will see you next time with a brand new after show.